Hello, everyone. Let's talk about BA2. BA2 is a variant of Omicron. And the reason I wanted to talk about it was because this Japanese group released a paper, preprint paper recently called Virological Characteristics of SARS-CoV-2. And I thought we would kind of read through that paper together. The reason I was interested in this is because BA2 is becoming the dominant strain, or is likely to become the dominant strain. In America, you can see this is a CDC variant tracker where it looks at the various proportions. You can see that Delta was the dominant strain in orange here. And then around early December, we saw the emergence of Omicron. And the original Omicron variant is this light purple, denoted as B11529. And then there is this variant called BA11, which is this dark purple variant. And then that started taking over and is now the dominant strain in the United States. But recently, in the past couple of weeks, there's been the emergence of something called BA2, and that is slowly taking up some of the proportion of variants in the United States. And in many countries, it is now the dominant strain rather than the BA1.1 variant. There is a website called covariants.org. It's run by Bern, Switzerland, the University of Bern in Switzerland. And they track various variants of COVID. And it's enabled by data from GSI-AID, which is a database where everyone submits their genomic data of the viruses they sequence. So it allows everyone in the world to look at the emergence of variants and genetic drift in real time. So it's a very interesting website if you want to go check it out at some time. And so here's the different variants: alpha, beta, gamma, delta. And then this is the original Omicron, and then this is BA2. So this is the 21L Omicron, also known as BA2. If you look here, you can see starting in January it emerges, and then in many, as of now, so let's look at the current data. As of now, you can see that in the Philippines, it is basically 100% of the variants. In India, it's 92%. In Denmark, it's 86%. Hong Kong, it's 83%. Sweden, it's 64%. And so anyway, down the line, it's taken over as the dominant strain, and it has a higher R number than the original Omicron. And what we don't know is if the things we want to know is it more we know it's more transmissible. Is it more severe? And do our therapies work for it? Do our vaccines work for it? Does natural immunity work for it? Those are the questions that we want to know. And this paper tries to look at them. All right, so let's look at it. Soon after the emergence and global spread of new SARS-CoV-2, Omicron BA1, another Omicron lineage BA2 has initiated outcompeting BA1. Statistical analysis show the effective reproduction number of BA2 is 1.4 times higher than BA1. So it's about 50% better at transmitting than the original Omicron. Neutralization experiments show that vaccine-induced humoral immunity fails to function against BA2, just like BA1. So Omicron, remember, had a lot of vaccine escape, and the antibodies did not function very well against BA1, and similarly, it does not function very well against BA2. Notably, the antigenicity of BA2 is different from BA1. So BA2 and BA1 are not that similar. And cell culture experiments show that BA2 is more replicative in human nasal epithelial and more fusogenic. Fusogenic means that when the viruses attack a cell, there's two ways that it can infect more cells. One, it releases and buds off the cell and then reinfects another cell by attaching to the ACE2 receptor. But it can also transmit to another cell by fusing the cell membranes of adjacent cells together and transmitting through the cytoplasm. So it basically, like, here's two cells, it fuses them together and becomes one cell, essentially. And then it fuses multiple cells, and then it can spread throughout all those cells. There is a paper here that talks about the cell fusion and pathogenesis of COVID-19. And you look here, and basically it forms this, what we call a syncytia, which is multiple cells together. So they promote cell-cell fusion to produce multinucleated syncytia. So that is what they're talking about. It has more. It causes more of that than the original BA1. And they, furthermore, infection experiments using hamsters show that BA2 is more pathogenic than BA1. The important thing to know is that people are not hamsters. And so just because it's more infectious and more pathogenic in hamsters does not necessarily mean it's more pathogenic in people. It does suggest that, but it's not proof, because hamsters are not people and people are not hamsters. All right, so virological characteristics of a newly emerging SARS-CoV-2 variant, such as transmissibility, so we want to know that. Pathogenicity, yes, we want to know that. Resistance to vaccine-induced immunity, antiviral drugs, yes, we want to know that. Is an urgent global health concern. In February 2022, the Omicron variant spread worldwide and represents the most recently recognized variant of concern. Omicron was first reported from South Africa at the end of November. Then a variant of Omicron, BA1 lineage, was rapidly spread throughout and outcompeted the other variants such as Delta. Another variant, BA2, has been detected in multiple countries such as Denmark and the UK, and notably BA2 has initiated outcompeting BA1, suggesting that BA2 is more transmissible than BA1. So just like Omicron outcompeted Delta, BA2 is now outcompeting the original Omicron. Few months since the emergence of BA1, we and others revealed the virological characteristics of BA1. For instance, BA1 is highly resistant to vaccine-induced humoral immunity and antiviral drugs. So we knew that about Omicron. Also, the spike protein of BA1 is less efficiently cleaved by furin and less fusogenic than those of Delta. Further, the pathogenicity of BA1 is attenuated when compared to Delta and the ancestral B11 virus. So they're saying BA1 is less virulent and it less pathogenic than Delta. However, the virological characteristics of BA2 remain unaddressed. All right, so they're trying to answer these fairly important questions that they talked about. You know, is it more transmissible? Is it more pathogenic? Does it escape previous immunity either through vaccine or infection? And do current therapies work for it? So this part they're just talking about how it developed. It's kind of minimal interest to us, but basically these are tree graphs showing how there's genetic drift and forming new variants. All right, this is kind of important, so I enlarged it in another tab. This shows this is Delta, okay? Delta is in orange, and then the original Omicron variant is this light green, and then gray is BA1.1, which was the first Omicron variant, and then this dark green is BA2. So you can see in the USA, we just saw from the CDC data, we had mostly the original, and now it's the BA1.1 variant that's the dominant strain, and just a little bit of BA2. But in India and Denmark, you can see now it is a large proportion of, in Denmark, the majority is the BA2. Okay, so although BA1 spread worldwide earlier than BA2, the lineage frequency of BA2 increased and exceeded that of BA1 since January 22 in multiple countries. All right, the hierarchical, so they constructed a mathematical model, a Bayesian model representing the epidemic dynamics of SARS-CoV-2 lineages. So Bayesian is a type of probability and statistical analysis theory. This hierarchical model then can estimate the global average of relative effective reproduction numbers. All right, so I think, so here it is. This is the effective reproduction number of BA1. So they set BA1, which is in here, at 1. That doesn't mean the reproduction number is 1. They're just setting it relative to BA1. So relative to BA1, Delta is like half. Okay, and then BA1.1 is a little bit higher, and then BA2 is much higher. And so you see in every case, Delta is lower, BA1.1 is a little higher, and then BA2 is about 50% higher. So here in the Philippines, but Philippines, their data is a little bit incomplete because their testing is probably not that great. But if you look at Denmark, their testing is pretty good. Sweden's probably pretty good. Israel's probably pretty good. UK, US, Germany, these are all pretty good. So they're drifting around 1.3 to 1.5. So they kind of settled on 1.4 times the reproduction number. So it means that it is definitely more transmissible than BA2 based on the current data that we have from various countries. Okay. Whereas we know that Delta is less transmissible. So the transmissibility, I believe this data is pretty strong, saying that BA2 is more transmissible than the original Omicron. And so it will become the dominant strain. Now, we don't really care about transmissibility per se, because a couple of things we need to think about is if BA2 is more transmissible, but previous vaccination or previous immunity protects against it, like similarly to Omicron, then it doesn't really matter which one we get. And if the pathogenicity is the same, it really doesn't matter what we get, whether it's BA1 or BA2, because we're going to behave the same way against them. So here we are, immune resistance of BA2. Since the sequence of BA2 is substantially different than BA1, it is reasonable to assume that the virological properties of BA2, such as immune resistance, pathogenicity, are different than BA1. So actually, I didn't know how different they are. So there's this other paper, which I'll link below, which was published a few days before this paper. And they are basically doing they did more like sequence and structural analysis. And I won't bore you with all the details of this, but they basically sequenced the genomes, and you can see here, it's a preprint, so the quality isn't high, but the first line is the original Wuhan variant, then this, the third one is the original Omicron, the one below it is 1.1, and the third one down is BA2, okay? So let me see if I can make it, I'll just make it a little smaller so we can all see it. Okay. So along the spike protein, here is the position number, and you see like at position 339, the original had a G here, and now they all have a D. And if you want to know what that is, you just look at this amino acid abbreviation. So G is glycine, and D is aspartate. So it went from a glycine to an aspartate. And then here, so this is BA2. This is the original, so not much different there. So far, the original and BA2 are not too different. Here's where they differ, right here. So BA2 has a phenylalanine, BA1 has a lysine. This is same. Wait, is F phenylalanine? Yeah, F is phenylalanine. P is proline. Okay. All right, so you can see that there are many places where they differ, like they differ here, they differ here, same, they differ here, same. Okay, so in the spike protein, maybe like 4 positions are different, but that may be enough to give immune escape. To reveal the biological features of BA2, we set out to perform neutralization assays using pseudoviruses and neutralizing antibodies elicited by vaccination. Okay, so now they're using vaccinated sera to see how well it recognizes BA2. All right, so BA1 is highly resistant to the anti-sera elicited by, this is the Moderna vaccine, and this is the AstraZeneca vaccine, and we expect that the Pfizer vaccine acts very similar to the Moderna vaccine. Similar to BA2, BA1, BA2 was also highly resistant to the vaccine-induced anti-sera. Okay, so let's look at that. Okay, so here you see that if you were previously Delta infected, you have very good response to Delta. And if you're Alpha infected, you have very good response to Alpha and Delta and the regular B11, but not so much to the Omicron variants. And the Omicron variants are not very effective. This is So this is, I think this represents previous infection data. So being previously infected with Delta or Alpha does not protect you very well against either Omicron variant. And then looking at this, fully vaccinated. So against Delta, you're pretty good. And then, yeah, not so good, because this is a logarithmic graph. So against BA1 and BA2. So BA1 and BA2 are very similar. Doesn't look like BA2 is that much different than BA1. Okay. So similar to the regular Omicron, the vaccine-induced anti-sera is not very good. And then moreover, BA1 and BA2 were highly resistant to convalescent sera. This is natural immunity who had been infected with early pandemic virus, Alpha and Delta. Okay. These data suggest that similar to BA1, BA2 is highly resistant to the anti-sera induced by vaccination. Now, what you want to know is, does previous infection with Omicron protect you against BA2? That's what I want to know. Because most likely I was infected with the original Omicron. So does that help me? Okay, so here we go. We tested 17 sera. So they tested blood from people that were infected with the original Omicron. 13 of these 17 were also fully vaccinated. So that would be the position I'm in, and lots of people are in that position. One was one dose vaccinated, and 3 were naive. They were not vaccinated, and they got Omicron. BA1 convalescent sera exhibited the strongest antiviral effect against BA1, BA2, which makes sense because, you know, they were infected with BA1. Although BA2 was 1.4-fold more resistant to the BA1 sera, there was no statistical difference. Okay. Alrighty. Okay, so here it is. Open a new tab. Okay, so here's the data for the mRNA vaccine. So you can see works really well against the original, then less well against Delta, and then really not well against Omicron. And then same thing with the AstraZeneca. Okay. This is infected with the early strain. You see that it works. They have very good resistance against the early strain, less well against Delta, and less well against Omicron, which is very similar to the profile. So this is natural immunity. The natural immunity profile looks very similar to vaccine-induced immunity. The profile is very similar. You can see the descending. So that, which makes sense because the vaccines are based off of the early original strain. All right, so now these people were infected with the original Omicron, and you see the people that were infected with the original Omicron, they actually still have better response against the original and the Delta, but the drop off is far less between with BA1 and BA2. But these two, although BA2 looks a little bit worse, it's not statistically significant. You see the p-value is 0.09, and usually the threshold for significance is less than 0.05. Now, I want to know where they're getting their information about. Okay, so I'm going to zoom this up again. Importantly, the BA1 convalescent sera with full vaccination exhibited significantly stronger antiviral effects against all variants tested than unvaccinated or one-dose vaccinated convalescents. That makes sense. So the best protection is if you've been vaccinated and you got Omicron. Okay, so you can go back to one of my videos called Super Immunity. You can search for it, and we talk about why that would be the case. Let me see if I can pull up this data. Extended data figure 3C. Okay. Oh, okay. So this is showing if you had, see, there were 4 people that were not fully vaccinated. 1 was only partially vaccinated, and 3 of them were non-vaccinated. So you see 4 dots here. And so if you were fully vaccinated and you got Omicron, this is the amount of antibodies you had against the original, which is really good. And then this is Delta, this is Omicron, this is BA2. And so there's a slight drop off. You see the same pattern here in the unvaccinated. So they're getting some protection from just having Omicron, but the protection is about more than 10-fold less, because this is a logarithmic scale. So more than 10-fold less. So you have 10 times more antibodies, more effective antibodies, if you've been vaccinated and you had Omicron than if you just had Omicron alone. So that's a very important point, I think. And I think the other important point is the drop off from BA1 to BA2 is not that high if you've been vaccinated. So see, this is almost the same. And the error bars are pretty tight. So you know this is almost the same. So that makes me think that BA2 is not going to be that relevant. Okay, then they talk about hamsters, which I don't really care too much about hamsters. They suggest something, but I don't think that I don't put too much stock in it until the stuff has been repeated in people. To investigate the virological characteristics, we generated chimeric recombinant CoV-2 that expresses green fluorescent protein. So this is like just a tag and harbors the S gene. Okay, so this is just a test to see how much it replicates in cell culture, and it seems to replicate a lot more. They also found it causes more fusogenesis. So this is all in vitro data. In vitro means that they did it in a test tube. In vivo means they did it in an animal or in a person. So this is in vitro data. So it suggests that this is not definite, but this kind of data suggests that BA2 replicates more easily and also causes more cell fusion, which could mean more pathogenicity. And then the last part of it, so this part they're talking about, we recently revealed that BA1 poorly utilizes TMR, and I was like, what is that? That is basically a transmembrane serine protease in people. And I think this lab happened to work on this protein, so they just threw that in there. I don't think that has any actual real significance clinically as of now. All right, so this is their hamster infection experiments. So according to their experiments, the hamsters seem to be they seem to do worse in terms of bronchoconstriction, airway obstruction, and weakness, that kind of stuff. They were worse than with the BA1. So in hamsters, at least, this virus is a little more severe than in people. And so do we know that this is worse in people? We don't know yet, but I think that it's probably not. It's a little early to tell, but it's probably not. If you look at the mortality data, if you look at some place that has a lot of BA2, if it was more pathogenic, you would expect their case fatality rate to rise up a little bit. And so let's look at India. You see India's graph. India has almost 100% BA2, and you see that there is a slight drop-off in case fatality rate because Omicron was a little bit less severe than Delta. And you don't see a bump up at the end as BA2 took over there. The other countries, so India's data is probably a little bit incomplete because they are a resource-limited country with a large population. If you look at Denmark, which also has a large proportion of BA2, you can see that there is no bump up. Now, there is a slight lag to mortality, so this reporting may not be complete, but right now there's no indication that there's actually increased case fatality rate as BA2 comes into the picture, whereas you can pretty clearly see that there's a decreased fatality rate with the introduction of Omicron, because as Omicron took over, you can see the case fatality rate dropping. So I hope that that was useful for everyone. I will link these couple of papers that I'm referencing in the description below. So BA2 is likely to become the dominant variant everywhere in the world, and it does seem to behave immunologically similar to Omicron. But the important thing is, it seems like if you have had Omicron, if you had Omicron infection, it does give you some level of protection to BA2. And if you've been vaccinated and you had Omicron, you have fairly good protection against BA2. So BA2 is probably not going to be that much of a problem. There is some in vitro data showing that it replicates more easily in cells, causes more cell fusion and syncytia formation, and in hamsters appears to give a little more severe disease. But so far in the countries that have a high proportion of BA2, the case fatality rates have not gone up, which suggests that in people that may not be the case. That part, I think, is going to become very clear over the next month as this variant takes over in more countries and we have more time to analyze the mortality data. But I suspect that my guess right now is that BA2 is not going to be that significant and isn't the more virulent variant that we are afraid is going to happen. So, there's two ways that we continue in this pandemic. One is that Omicron has infected a large proportion of people now, and basically most people in the world have either been infected or have been vaccinated or both. And if there's a future variant, it needs to escape both natural and vaccine immunity and cause more severe disease. As long as it doesn't cause more severe disease, or it doesn't massively escape previous immunity, either through vaccination or natural immunity or both, then it's not really much of a concern. My guess is that BA2 is going to fall into that category where it's not more pathogenic, and it does not appear to escape cause immune escape any worse than Omicron did, and previous Omicron infection in conjunction with vaccination seems to be very protective against it, according to this data. A lot of this is lab data, which is really good, but is not the final word on any of this stuff. Unfortunately, final word on a lot of this stuff is just going to take time. It's going to take probably another month before data either proves that my suspicions are right or wrong. We'll know in about a month. Okay, well, thanks for watching, and comments below are welcome.